Hello. Hello. Good evening. Good evening. So we finally got around to doing this. I'm excited because it's been something I've been looking forward to last time we had to cancel. So tonight we will be reading from an old folklore book. Not sure how much we'll get through it because it is a very long one. But yeah. So tonight we'll be reading from Scottish Fairy and Folk Tales, selected and edited with an introduction by Sir George Douglas Bart. So this is from, I believe it was published in 1900. And it's just about Scottish folk tales. Just as kind of like a disclaimer, I did flip through it. Old books in general tend to have dated terminology that we no longer consider to be appropriate these days. So if I see a word like that I recognize, I will just skip over it or try to replace it with something. Otherwise, yeah, just as a warning. I didn't see anything glaringly obvious in my first kind of flip through, but hopefully we won't run into anything too bad. So, without further ado, let's begin. So this is just the contents and stuff. Oh, also, if you're curious, this book that I have here is from the Internet Archive. You can go on there and access all kinds of books. It's a great resource for older books, especially, that are harder to find. So. Introduction. It is only within comparatively recent years that the homely stories in the mouths of the country people have been constituted a branch of learning, and had applied to them as such the methods and the terminology of science. No doubt a very noteworthy gain to knowledge has resulted from this treatment. A curious department of research has been opened up, and light has been cast upon various outside things of great importance than the subject of study itself. But side by side with this gain to knowledge, is there not, involved in the method of treatment indicated, a loss to the stories themselves? Classified, tabulated, scientifically named, they are no longer the wild, free product of nature that we knew and loved. They are become, so to speak, a collection of butterflies in a case, an album of pressed wildflowers. No doubt they are still very interesting and highly instructive, but their poetry, their brightness, the fragrance which clung about them in their native air, their native soil, is in large measure gone. Well then, with all due recognition of the value of the labors of scientific folklorists and the comparative mythologist, whose work I would not, for one moment, be understood to undervalue, is there not room, even at the present day, to study these stories from another point of view, and that the simplest and most obvious one, the point of view, I mean, of the storyteller, pure and simple? One would hope that the time had not yet come when the old tales, considered on their own merits, have entirely ceased to charm, and it is an undeniable fact that there are still persons among us who would regard it as a real and personal loss could they be made to believe that the ideal hero of their childhood as he falls heroically in a bloody battle, wounded to the death, is in reality a myth or an allegory to embody the setting of the sun, and who would even feel themselves aggrieved could they be brought to realize that the bugbear of their baby years, their own particular bugbear, is common also, there's the first word that we won't be using, of Polynesia. So great is the power of early association. Well then, my proposal is to consider the tales of the Scottish peasantry simply from the literary, critical, or storyteller's point of view. From the point of view, that is, of persons who actually tell them, to whom they are actually told. I suppose that most nations, while their life has remained primitive, have practiced the art of storytelling, and certainly the Scotch were no exceptions to the rule. Campbell of Isla, who wrote about 30 years ago, records that in his day the practice of storytelling still lingered in the remote western islands of Barra. There's going to be probably a lot of names that I get wrong. I'm only like a very, very beginner when it comes to like Scottish Gaelic and stuff, so I don't actually know the pronunciation of all of the names. Feel free to correct me if you know more. where in the long winter nights the people would gather in crowds to listen to those whom they considered good exponents of the art. At an earlier date, but still at the time within living memory, the custom survived at Poole Ewe in Rossshire, where the young people were used to assemble at night to hear the old ones recite the tales which they had learned from their forefathers. Here, and at earlier dates in other parts of the country also, the demand for stories would further be supplied by traveling peddlers, or by gaberlunzie men or pauper wandering musicians and entertainers, or by the itinerant shoemaker or tailor Whip the Cat, as he was named, both of which last were accustomed to travel through thinly populated country districts in the pursuit of their calling, and to put up for the night at farmhouses, where, whilst plying their needles, they would entertain the company with stories. The arrival of one of these storytellers in a village was an important event. As soon as it became known, there would be a rush to the house where he was lodged, and every available seat on bench, table, bed, beam, or the floor would quickly be appropriated. And then for hours together, just like some first-rate actor on a stage, the storyteller would hold his audience spellbound. During his recitals, the emotions of the reciter were occasionally very strongly excited, as were also of those of his listeners, who at one time would be on the verge of tears, at another would give way to loud laughter. There were many of these listeners, by the way, who believed firmly in all the extravagances narrated. And such rustic scenes as these, as I hope presently to show, have by no means been without their marked effect on Scottish literature. In his tour through the islands, Campbell of Isla, my authority for these particulars, visited one of the old storytellers in his home. The man was far advanced in years, and he lived in a rude hut on the shore at Oost? I don't know. Oh, Oost, probably. Campbell describes the scene in detail. The hut consisted of one room only. The fireplace was the floor and the chimney a hole above it, so that the air was dense with peat smoke, whilst the rafters were hung with streamers and festoons of soot. The old man himself had the manner of a practiced narrator. He would chuckle at certain places in his stories, and like an ancient mariner or like one of the Weird Sisters, would lay a withered finger on the listener's knee when he came to the terrifying parts. A little boy in a kilt stood at his knee, gazing in his wrinkled face and devouring every word. Whilst the story lasted, 3 wayfarers dropped in, listened for a while, and then proceeded on their way. The daylight streamed down the chimney, lighting up a tract in the blue mist of the peat smoke, and falling on the white hair and brown wrinkled face of the old man, as he sat on a low stool by the fire, and on the rest of the dwelling with its furniture of boxes and box beds, dresser, dishes, gear of all sorts, until at last it faded away through the shades of deepening brown to the black darkness of the smoked roof and the corner where the peat was stored. To turn now from the storyteller to the stories. Perhaps the most characteristic of the Highland tales are those, somewhat tedious they are, it must be confessed, with all their repetitions of dialogues, all their reproductions of what is practically one situation, which deal with heroes and giants. The shortest kind of popular tale, on the other hand, is that which is concerned with the dumb animals, by no means dumb, of course, in the stories. The Highlands, too, are particularly rich in these tales, and it is easy to understand how the country people generally, living so near to nature as they do, may come to have an insight into and appreciation of the character of the brute animals, together with a sympathy with them in their tussle for existence, which is not attainable by those who lead a more artificial life. Some of the apologues and traits of animal life in which this knowledge and appreciative sympathy have been embodied are decidedly naive and quaint, nor do they lack a pungent human application. The class of stories next to be considered displays a higher degree of fancy, and it must be imagined that this quality of fancy is anything less than a characteristic attribute of the minds of many of the Scotch peasantry. It displays itself in its simplest form, perhaps, in their nomenclature, in which names which they have given either to natural objects or to places which are characterized by some striking natural feature. In the Highlands, the Gaelic place names are often very elaborate indeed, but to turn now to the Lowlands, a waterfall in the Selkirkshire hills, where the water, after pouring dark over a declivity, dashes down in white foam among rocks, is known as the Grey Mare's Tail. Twin Hills in Roxburghshire, which have beautifully rounded matched summits, have been christened Maiden's Paps. Then the cirrus, or curl cloud, is in rustic speech goat's hair. The phenomenon of the northern lights among the fishermen of Shetland is the merry dancers, and Pleiades are the twinklers. The constellation of Orion, with its star iota pendant as if from a girdle, is the king's ell-wand, or yard measure. The nauseous froth, which adheres to the stalks of rank vegetation at midsummer, is the witch's spittle. There is a root of poetry, I think, in this aptitude for giving names. And as a matter of fact, in the lowlands of Scotland, rustic poets and rhymesters are far from uncommon. Nor are the peasantry, in their name-giving, wanting in literary elusiveness. Elusiveness, that is, to the only book which has ever obtained universal currency among them. For example, among the fishermen of the East Coast, the black mark below the gills of a haddock is Peter's thumb, while a coarse plant, commonly found in the cornfields, which has its leaves strangely clouded and stained as if with droppings, and is called, I believe, by the botanists, Polygonum persicaria, is locally known on the borders as the flower which grew at the foot of the cross. Perhaps the deepest thinkers among a people who have the philosophers as well as their dreamers are to be found among the hill shepherds. And it is chiefly through the instrumentality of one of these hill shepherds that we can now, in fancy, enter that realm of fancy, the world of fairyland. James Hogg, the Ettrick shepherd, was one of those common men, plus genius, who every now and then in the history of literature give to a whole world of floating thought, fancy, tradition, and permanent substantial form. No man in literature is his master in the weird tale. No man but Shakespeare. Not even, excepting Drayton, has written so well of the fairies. Hogg was born in the Aradia of Scotland, Ettrick Forest, where, as Scott tells us, the belief in fairies lingered longer than elsewhere, about the year 1770. When he was a young man, the spirit of emulation was stirred in his breast by the example of the poet Burns, and so as he wandered through the pastoral solitudes, keeping his sheep, he carried an inkhorn slung from his neck and taught himself to write, and so he committed his first poem to paper. And as he thus wandered and mused, he is said to have fallen asleep one day upon a green hillside to dream the dream of Kilmeny, and to bear her image in his heart forever after. The story of Kilmeny is that of a girl of poetic nature, a lover of solitude, who, wandering alone at twilight, disappears in a wild glen among the hills. She is sought for by her friends, at first hopefully, at last despairingly. No trace of her is found. Years pass and the mystery remains unsolved. But at the close of the 7th year, in the same twilight hour in which she had vanished, Kilmeny returns to her home. She has been wrapped away by fairies, with whom the intervening years have been spent. But in the midst of fairyland, her heart still yearns tenderly to her home, and when 7 years had expired, and the fairies have no longer power to detain her against her will, she chooses to leave the life of pleasure which she leads among them, to return to the common earth. Such is an outline of the story. But the story is the least part of the poem. Its charm lies in its exquisitely flowing and melodious verse, in its suggestion of the twilight world, and of a world of shadows, a land where all things are forgotten. In its wistful tenderness, in a word, in the unique and perfect aptness of the story to the subject. So magical, indeed, are the fairy touches throughout the writings of the Ettrick shepherd that one might almost be tempted to dream that the experience with tradition credits Thomas the Rhymer had been shared by this rhymer of a later day. As in England, tales of fairies caught sight of on the country green, at twilight or by the moonlight, of services rendered by mortals to fairies and gratefully and gracefully repaid, find a place among the fables of the Scottish peasantry. But it is by no means in such airy, gracious, and harmless, if not beneficent, creations as this that the genius of the Scottish nation finds its fancies most congenial food. That genius is upon the whole essentially a somber one, relieved indeed by a rough humor, but tending most to an affinity with gloom. The hostility of nature, its permanence as contrasted with the transient character of man, its victoriousness in the never-ending battle waged against it by man, a battle in which he fights for life, in which he gains a few trifling and temporary advantages, but in which he must recognize from the first that he fights against impossible odds. These are facts which a barren soil and bleak and stormy climate have thrust forcibly upon the Scottish popular imagination, and which have impressed themselves deeply upon it. The shepherd battling for his life, and for the lives of his flock, against the force and darkness of driving snow, is a far more characteristic Scottish figure than that of James Hogg asleep on the hillside, dreaming of fairyland. This gloomy view of nature has tinged the superstitious beliefs, and through them the stories of the Scottish peasantry. And upon the back of this gloomy view of nature has come a sense, stronger, perhaps, than is felt by any other nation, of fate and doom, of the mystery of life and death, and the cruelty of the inevitable, the pain of separation, the darkness which enshrouds the whole. In this sense, the Scotch are a nation of pessimists. They have found their religious vocation in Calvinism, the gloomiest and most terrible of creeds, and the spirit which embraced Calvinism, like a bride, informs their mythology and their fireside tales. Their tendency to devil worship, to the propitiation of evil spirits, is illustrated by the hideous usage of Goodman's Croft, a plot of ground near a village which was left untilled, set apart for and dedicated to the powers of evil, in the hope that their malignity might be appeased by the sacrifice, and that so they might be induced to spare the crops on the surrounding fields. This is such a funnily written portion of this book. Like, they're just like, oh yes, the evil spirits, but like, okay, dude. Of the state of superstitious dread in which some Scotchmen pass their lives, Mrs. Grant of Laggan gives a further curious illustration when she tells us that in the Highlands of her day, to boast or to congratulate a friend was to rashly court retribution, whilst to praise a babe upon the nurse's arm was to incur suspicion of wishing to bring down ill upon its head. Holding such beliefs as these is not the wondered as if in their stories the Scotch are the past masters of the weird. Their very nursery tales, many of them, would appear to have been conceived with a view to educating, for some strange purpose or other, the passions of horror and sorrow in the child to whom they are told. Such rhymes, for instance, as the Tempted Lady, the False Knight, and the Wee Boy, the Strange Visitor, are uncanny to a degree. In the two former, the evil one himself appears in specious disguise. The Strange Visitor is Death. The nursery ballad of the Crudendew, a term of affection applied to a child, is as full of combined piteousness and sinister suggestion of the underhand wickedness as any little tragedy of its length could well be. The suggestion is that of a man's childless, lawful wife bearing a bitter grudge against another woman who has borne him a child. The babe returns from a day's outing and is questioned by his slighted mother as to where he has been and what he has done, but he is tired and cries out to be put to bed. The jealous woman, however, persists in her interrogatory and asks him what he has had for dinner. He replies that he has dined off a little four-footed fish. The eft or newt is like the toad and the common superstition venomous. And what was done with the bones of this singular fish? Asked the woman. They were given to the lapdog. And what did the dog do? After eating them, he shot out his feet and died. There, with admirable art, the ballad ends. Its effect is immensely heightened by a burden or refrain in which, at the close of every verse, the child, with wearisome iteration and with childlike importunity, cries out to his mother to make his bed soon. This little song of child life is queer fare to set before a child. Stoddart, the tourist, long ago pointed out the contrast between the fairies of the English popular mythology and those of the Scotch, and certainly the delicate, joyous, tricksy race of moonlight revelers whom we meet in the pages of Shakespeare are scarcely to be recognized as belonging to the same family with the soulless, man-stealing creations of the Scottish peasant's fancy. Jeez, dude. The effect exercised upon popular superstitions by the ruling passion of Calvinistic religion is one of the most striking things in Scottish folklore. For example, the belief in fairies did not cease to exist. It does not seem even to have been universally discountenanced by the Church, for we find mention of eases in which ministers of the gospel but combine with their parishioners to take measures for the restitution of infants, which the fairies had changed at nurse, or for the recovery of women who had been spirited away. And indeed, two of the most curious pieces of composition known to me are a pamphlet on second sight, written by a minister of Tiree, and an article on the fairies, written by a minister of Aberfoyle, both in the 17th century. Both writers were obviously firm believers in the superstitions upon which they wrote, and in both cases the gross ignorance and darkness of the writer's mind is only equaled by the authoritative weight and pedantry of his style. The solemn league and covenant had left its mark even upon the fairies, as the touching little story of the fairy and the Bible reader shows. What in the heck? The fairies, and that rough, grotesque, humorsome but good-natured figure, the brownie, occupy, however, but a small space in the popular mythology in comparison with such shapes of awe, of terror, or of ill omen as the ghosts. So essentially, one of the more common fairies were brownies, and they're essentially just little creatures that kind of will come by, and if you they're considered like house fairies or house fae kind of. If you leave them food, they would sometimes do chores for you. They're generally seen as pretty good fae. Let's see, where was I? With such shapes of awe or terror of an ill omen as the ghosts, more real than living man, which the Highland Ezekiel saw borne past him on the wind in Morven of the gloomy skies, or as the witch, the wraith, the warning, the water kelpie, the man or woman who has the second sight, the evil or lost spirit. The characteristic rough humor of the Scottish peasant as it affects the creations of the fancy embodies itself almost exclusively in the brownie. This was a half-human creature of uncouth appearance. Yes, here we go. Was his matted head on his brett did rest, a lang blue beard wandered down like a vest, but the glare o' his, I think it's eye hath nae bard oppressed, expressed. During the day he would lurk in out-of-the-way corners of some old house which he had chosen to inhabit, and in the night time would make himself useful to the family, to which he had attached himself. But the conditions of his service were the most disinterested ever drawn up, and on the slightest attempt being made to reward him for his labors he would disappear forever. The Brown Man of the Moors is another of those twilight or half-seen creations. But he is not of a domestic character. Wanderers upon lonely moors might, on rare occasions, catch a glimpse of him squatting in a hollow, a short, thick, powerful figure, earth-colored, or of the tint of the surrounding ling? Shelly coat dwelt in the waters. He was accustomed to appear decked out with the spoils of the sea, his coat being hung with shells, which clattered as he moved, and his delight was in mischief, such as, for instance, like the spunky or the will-o'-the-wisp, in leading travelers astray. Nucklevy, the sea devil of the Orkney Islands, a more formidable figure, seemed to be shaped like a man above and like a horse below, and his peculiar horror lay in the fact that, being skinless, his raw red flesh was exposed to view. Then there was the river horse, a supernatural being supposed to feed in the shape of a horse on the shores of Loch Lochy, and when disturbed, to plunge into its waters. The river bull emerged from the lake to visit the cow pastures, and there were cowherds who pretended that they could distinguish the calves of which he was the sire. Most of these creatures of the fancy are peculiar to the Scotch, and one cannot help fondly speculating as to the poetic use which Shakespeare would have made of them, had they happened to be among the associations of his childhood. But a more subtle water spirit than any of these mentioned was the kelpie, whose appearances were generally timed either to give warning of death, Layla Smith 12, thank you for the follow. Welcome in. Where was I? But a more subtle water spirit than any of those yet mentioned was the Kelpie, whose appearances were generally timed either to give warning of death by drowning or to lure men to a watery grave. The Kelpie story of the doomed rider, to be found in the present collection, admirably illustrates the sentiment of fatalism inherent in the Scottish peasant's mind. In illustration of the kindred feeling of the malevolence of nature, inherent there also, the poet Alexander Smith has aptly quoted the following popular rhyme, a dialogue in which two rivers are supposed to be the speakers. Said Tweed to Till, "What gars ye rin say still?" Said Till to Tweed, "Though ye rin wi' speed, and I rin slaw, for every an ye droon, I droon twa." Here it appears that the elements are our enemies and war against us to the death. But beyond a doubt, the most valuable element in the peasant tales, considered from the poetic standpoint, is not the fanciful or imaginative element, but the human. This is, in some cases, brought out in extraordinary strength by the juxtaposition of the supernatural. Space allows me to cite but a single instance, by far the strangest, the most startling, and to the most incomprehensible of all the Scottish superstitions is the belief in the periodical return of the dead to their former homes. Not as night-walking ghosts encountered only by solitary persons in the dark, but as social beings come back to join the family circle and share in its festivities. In short, in the old phrase, come back to dine and dance with the living. How anything so incredible should ever have come to be believed, we may well be at a loss to understand. Yet believed it seems to have been. There are two of the old ballads which are concerned with the belief, and they are two of the most beautiful which have come down to us. The fragment entitled "The Wife of Usher's Well" sets forth how a thriving countrywoman made provision for her 3 sons by sending them to sea, but they have not been long away from her when she hears they had perished in a storm. Then, in the madness of her grief, she puts up a blasphemous prayer to heaven, praying that the conflict of wind and wave may never cease until her sons come home to her, in their likeness as she knew them of old. Her prayer is heard and answered. It fell about the Martinmas, when nights are lang and murk, the Carlin wife's 3 sons came hame, and their hats were o'er the birk. It neither grew in syke nor glen, nor yet in one shook, I don't know, but at the gates of paradise that birk grew fair anook. I think it's enough, probably. Rising to a weight of simple, unconscious, tragic irony, which is little less than sublime, the ballad goes on to detail the domestic preparations made by the mother to fete the homecoming of her sons. In a fever of happiness over the restoration of her lost ones, she issues her orders to her maids. The fatted calf is slain, and so on, and a brief hour of joy goes by. Then, as it grows late, the young men betake themselves to rest. The mother has prepared their bed with her own hands, but the dawn draws near, the period of their sojourn is almost up. The cock crows, and they recognize the signal for their departure. Up then crew the red... I know this is probably going to get taken out of context, but yes. And up craw the grey, and the eldest to the youngest said, "'Tis time we were away." The cock hadn't crawed but once, nor clapped his wings at when the youngest to the eldest said, "Brother, we must away." The cock doth craw, the day doth daw, the channerin worm doth chide, gin we missed out our place, a sair pain we maun abide. Then fare ye weel, my mither dear, farewell to barn and byre, and fare ye well to bonny lass that kinless my mother's fire. In this instant, the superstition of the return of the dead to their homes to visit their friends is complicated with the idea of punishment for a rash utterance or impious prayer. But in the other ballad, which deals with the same theme, the Clerk's Twa Sons o' Osenford, the fundamental idea appears in its simplest form. In other respects, the two stories resemble each other, except that in the second case, the young men, 2 in number, are represented as paying the penalty of death, like the cavaliers of the Tour de Nesle, for a little of dear bought love, and their coming is timed at Christmas. These 2 tales are probably the wildest in the whole range of Scottish popular story, but wild as they are, they contain, I think, a distinct and deep human significance. It will be observed that in either case, the homecoming of the dead is placed at a season of relaxation and festivity, at Martinmas, namely, in the one case, and at Christmas in another. At such seasons as these, the thoughts of the working people set free for a space from their daily occupations are at liberty to wander, whilst it is a fact that the annual recurrence of such red-letter days, or landmarks in time, with their familiar accompaniment of ceremonies and usages, bring bygone years before the mind with a peculiar clearness, or at least brings them before the minds of people who lead simple, monotonous lives, with a few events to vary them. Nothing is commoner at such seasons than to hear people refer to the friends whom they have lost since that time last year, dwelling, as they do so, upon the characters, ways, and particular acts of the departed. While from this peculiar vividness of mental realization, it is, for a bold and poetic imagination, but a single step, to conjure up the actual bodily presence of the lost ones. Hence may have arisen these wild stories, and hence, no doubt, arose the fancy, a beautiful and touching one, I think, that at Christmas the dead return to their homes to dine and dance with the living. The few specimens at which we have now glanced must suffice to illustrate for us the more striking characteristics of the Scottish peasant tales, generally these characteristics being, as I take it, first, an ever lively and inventive fancy, secondly, a powerful imagination. The Scottish peasant storyteller is, like Homer, there is no way in heck I'm even going to try to pronounce that. As Quintilian hath it, we should say perhaps that he had poetic vision, but the phrase does not cover quite the same ground, and this powerful imagination is apt to be gloomily affected, and at times distempered by the natural features of the country, to the conditions of life there, and the broodings of the national mind. Thirdly, a love of humanity coupled with a keen sense of the hardness of its lot, manifesting itself in a poignant pathos. Of course, in a country of mixed races like Scotland, the general characteristics of the tales vary widely in different parts of the country. The I don't know if it's going to be pronounced Celt or Celt. I'm just going to say Celt. The Celt of the West Highlands, for instance, has a penchant for giants, and a perfect callousness of the feelings at which it is impossible not to marvel. Where the lives and sufferings of said giants and of their belongings are concerned. In one word, the giant of the West Highland tales is always fair game. You cannot, by any contrivance, take a mean advantage of him. Again, the trolls, trows, hillfolk, or grey neighbours of the Norsemen of the Shetland Islands have a character of their own, distinct from that of the fairies of the rest of Scotland, and harmonizing perfectly with the colourless landscape of their native melancholy shores. In general terms, it may perhaps be said that the Highland tales display the more inexhaustibly luxuriant invention, whilst those of the lowlands have the advantage of a more clearly defined outline and enjoy a monopoly in depth of human significance. Gotta get a sip of water. To glance now at the literary bearing of these tales, in this respect, the oral traditions of the Scottish peasantry have enjoyed particular advantages from the fact that the rich mind which they afford has been industrially and admirably worked by the modern Scottish writers. Perhaps the most marked features of a Scottish poetry have been, in the earlier times, its national and in later times its popular character. Well, in modern times at least, both of these characteristics have been shared by Scottish prose. This may not indeed be true, or at least not without large reservations, of the writings of Smollett, but from Smollett's day onward, the Scottish prose, belles lettres, I don't know, have been essentially a growth of the soil, and the Scotchmen who have labored the field of popular tradition have been far from working it upon the lines of such writers as, for instance, Musaeus? I don't know. Tick and Lamotte. I absolutely have zero ability with French. Making the popular tale a mere foundation upon which they rear their own structures of philosophy or fancy, and often transforming it almost, if not quite, beyond recognition. Neither have they worked in the spirit of such a writer as Théophile Gautier, who, though he would sometimes use the popular tale as material to work on, had in this regard nothing national about him, being before all things a stylist, an artist, pure and simple, indifferent, isolated from ties of country, from ties of kindred, from ties of humanity. The Scottish writers, on the other hand, are in the first case objective, and in the second highly national. First and foremost among these writer ranks, of course, Sir Walter Scott, neglected as, in comparison with his other books, his border minstrelsy has been the fact remains that he produced no more highly characteristic work, whilst of that great literature of fiction of which he afterwards became the author, the best and most vital parts may, I think, be truly be said to have their roots in the hearts of the people. And the further he departs from the source of his inspiration, the less valuable his work becomes. Though not born in the peasant class himself, Sir Walter knew the Scottish peasantry, in his own way as few men have known them, and he lived on the terms of friendly intimacy with his valued Tom Purdys and Swanstons, and of close literary confidence with such men as William Laidlaw and Joseph Train. The two writers who rank next in the group alluded to were, however, peasants born. James Hogg has already been spoken of. Allan Cunningham, born in 1784, was a son of the land steward of the estate on which Robert Burns occupied a farm, a circumstance which, no doubt, had its effect in stimulating the poetic impulse that was in him. On growing up, he adopted the trade of a mason. An antiquarian, Cromwell by name, was at the time engaged in forming a collection of remains of Galloway and Nithsdale song, on the model of Percy's relics, and he applied to young Cunningham to collect old poems for him. Honest Allan, as his friend Thomas Carlyle styled him, was not successful in his quest, but nothing daunted, he set to work to compose songs and ballads which, if they could not in the nature of things possess... Hi, Frostbite! Good evening! How are you doing this evening? I'm still in the foreword. This is like such a long foreword. We're 26 pages into this book and it's still in the foreword. Or the introduction, I guess. I missed 40 minutes. No worries, no worries. It's just been the introduction, and also the VOD will be available. I'll be posting it on YouTube. But yeah, no, this is just the introduction to the book. This guy is very, very wordy, I will say that much. Where was I? Doing great, thanks for asking. How are you? I'm doing well. I managed to get my scene finished, as you can see, which is nice. So I'm happy. Next time I'd like to be able to have like an animated book asset. It's actually the morning and just woke up, haha. Oh, gotcha. Well, good morning to you, Frostbite. I hope you have a good rest of your day. Alrighty. Where was I? Compose songs and ballads which, if they could not, in the nature of things, possess the quality of age, should at least be as good as old, or better if possible. These he transmitted to his employer, without explanation. Cromwell's love for antiquity would appear to have been a pure passion, inasmuch as he seems to have loved it for the sake of any, or for profit. which was to be derived from attachment, and for no other reason. He was delighted with his young correspondent's contributions to the remains of Galloway and Nithsdale song, and Cunningham's literary career was thus begun. His traditional tales of English and Scottish peasantry are perhaps the best of the many books which he wrote, and are essentially distinguished by the sweetness of his style and by the picturesque traits of old-fashioned country life, and the exquisite touches of fresh nature painting in which they abound. After Cunningham becomes Campbell of, I still don't know if it's Isla or Isla, born in 1822. He was of gentle birth, but understood and sympathized with the peasantry. A proficient in the Gaelic language, he went about on foot among the people of the West Highlands and Islands, like a sort of Romany Rye, or like Catskin, the wandering young gentleman of the Garland, and got them to tell him stories, which he accurately noted down. In his writings, therefore, we get the stories as nearly as possible in the exact words in which they were told. He died about 6 or 7 years ago, at the time of this book being written. Then there is Dougal Graham, the chapbook writer, who has been called the Scottish Rabelais. He began life as chapman, and came in course of time to be Skelett Bellman of Glasgow. His magnum opus is a metrical narrative of the Jacobite Rising of 45, in which he himself took part, and to him are also attributed the invention of turnipspike and John Cheap, and the history of witty exploits of George Buchanan, the King's Jester. Then, after Graham, come Robert Chambers, whose fame as a publisher has somewhat obscured his well-earned fame as a writer. Hugh Miller, the geologist, and the among men of merely local reputation, James Telford the Sawtrey, and many others. Literature takes the life of tradition and then embalms the dead body. What stories, then, have taken the place as genuine peasant tales, though belonging to a period of decadence, of the old stories which introduce the supernatural and have ceased to be believed? Well, there are a variety, which do not tax the power of credulity quite too far. Stories of old local battles, for instance, and how some neighboring stream or river ran discolored with blood for 3 whole days after the fighting. Stories of buried treasure. There is the English knight whom Jock of Heaviside slew, and who lies buried in his silver armor not far from Agricola's camp at Pennymuir. Then there is a neighboring treasure which lies wrapped in bullock's hide, buried in a hill. It is said, circumstantially enough, to have been concealed by 2 brothers in time of war. But it is described with judicious vagueness as lying exactly midway between 2 places, only one of which is known. A third treasure is more particularly localized. The field in which it lies buried is well known, but if any man set spade in that field to dig for it, the sky, we are told, will ere long grow dark. Oh my gosh. My mouth just did something random without my permission. Will ere long grow dark, and a muttering of thunder will be heard, and a flash of lightning seen. This story certainly does trench perilously near to superstition. Then again, there are other treasures with which even if one did happen to light upon one of them, it would not be safe to meddle. They are supposed to have been buried in a time of the plague, perhaps as sacrifices to appease some unknown power, and the infection of the pestilence is supposed to have been buried with them, so that, were they to be unearthed, the plague would probably break out again. On the seacoast, sunken treasure ships take the place of buried treasures. Then there are stories of mysterious caverns in which people enter but from which they do not come out. There is one cave of this kind, into which a huntsman and a pack of hounds are said to have pursued a hunted fox, but from which neither fox, hounds, huntsman, nor horse were ever known to emerge again. Then there is another cave in which a piper penetrated, playing on his pipes. He never came out either. His music was listened to for a long time by persons at the mouth of the cavern. At first it was loud and cheerful, then it grew fainter and fainter, more plaintive and more plaintive, until at last it died away into the bowels of the earth. Then there are kindred stories of subterranean passages of great length, sometimes said to have been fashioned by the monks, uniting ancient castles or religious establishments. Then there are modern varieties of the hero tale, stories of fights and of adventures by blood and field. A favorite one is that of a prodigious leap taken by the hero in escaping from pursuit. There are also stories of remarkable local characters, the desperate ones being preferred. There is, for instance, the skeptical country gentleman who, having led a merry life and scoffed at the minister, preserved at least the virtue of consistency by leaving directions in his will that he was to be buried in a vaulted chamber, seated at a table with a churchwarden pipe in his mouth, and a bottle and glass before him. Or else there is that other reprobate who, when lands are gone and money spent, resolved to put an end to his life. So he blindfolded a favorite mare, mounted her, and rode towards the cliff heads. Then he put her to a gallop and prepared for a leap into space. But just as she reached the brink, by some instinct, the blind mare swerved and turned. He set her at the frightful leap again, and again she refused, and after a third failure he is said to have seen the error of his ways, and to have ridden home, and from that day led a reformed life. Then lastly, there is the murder tale, the narrative of some desperate deed. It must not be hastily classed with the literature of Penny Dreadful and the Shilling Shocker order, for whatever may be the shortcomings of variety, vulgarity at least is not one of them, and the peasant tales never sink so low to his level as that. Blood may be spilt in them, and spilt freely it often is, but there are always present redeeming touches of fancy, of poetry, of character painting, of the picturesque, to raise the terrible histories from the rank of the sensation novel to that of the poetic tragedy. What, in conclusion, is there in these rude old wives' tales to justify their withdrawal from a limbo of forgotten things? They have a place, though it be a humble one, in the history of workings of the human mind. They are the manifestation in its simplest form, the literacy or poetic impulse, and nothing that has been thus generated, and that has stood the test of time as these tales have done, can never, I believe, be unworthy of our study. To take an instance from another art, anthropologists tell us that ages and ages ago, I'm not sure, let me read the rest of this real quick. It's alright, but we're not going to use that word. There was a man dwelling in a cave in a bleak northern country, among mountains which were covered with pine trees. He was agile, able-bodied, and ingenious, and he faced the mighty beasts of the forest in his hunting to obtain food for his wife and children. We know next to nothing about him, but we do know that one day it has somehow occurred to him to make a drawing on the wall of his cave, of something which he had seen and had no doubt admired. So he etched a little picture of a reindeer, copying faithfully the outline of the body and the branching of the antlers. This, reader, is the man whom we speak of as the Paleolithic man. His performance had the innate permanence, from a human point of view, of all true art. It remains and it continues to interest to this day, for it is the outcome of the first faint stirrings in the human breast of two passions, the love of beauty and the thirst for fame. One touch of nature makes the whole world kin. The lapse of countless centuries does not prevent our entering into the feelings of that simple artist, and what he felt in his day and hour is felt to their degree by the tellers of the tales of Scottish peasantry. Art is not only a thing bound of volumes and exhibitions, and the Scottish peasant has shown perhaps as keen a sense of it, of the storyteller's art at least, as his mental development and the conditions of his existence would admit. George Douglas. The substance of this introduction was delivered as a lecture at the Royal Institution, January 29th, 1892. We're finally through the introduction. Only, 33 pages in or whatever. All right. The Three Green Men of Glenaviv, Part 1. Well, it is not the least use talking about it. There is not more than one loaf of bread in the house, or one bobby in the stocking, said the widow of Rannoch to her three sons, Donald, Dougal, and Duncan. So go, each of you, and seek a fortune, And if a fortune you get, don't forget your old mother, for she's tried to do her best by you for many long day." And Donald, Dugald, and Duncan all agreed that she spoke the truth, and that the best thing they could do for her now was to go at once, returning as soon as good fortune would let them. So the widow of Rannoch divided the loaf into 4 portions and gave a bit to each, putting it in their wallets and keeping 1 bit for herself. Then she gave them her blessing, and off they started. Now they set their faces towards the west, where lay the great ocean. Perchance they would get a passage there in a ship to the south, where the bright gold lay for the gathering. That they would be much better than making for the east, where everyone was as poor as themselves, they knew already, only too well. Over the moor they trudged, and Donald sang a song to cheer Dugald and Duncan. And when he was tired, Dugald told a story to while away the time for Donald and Duncan. When his story came to an end, Duncan was just going to show them some other kind of diversion when he stopped, seized both of his brothers by the arms, and pushing them before him into a peat hole, bade them for their life's sake hide among the high hags at the side, and for not utter a syllable or make the slightest sound. "For," said he, "I see the witch of Benabrach coming in the distance towards us." And sure enough, there she was, coursing over the moor in a direct line with them, waving her magic staff. As she strode over the pools, the water splashed upwards in brown foam before her. As she clambered over the peat hags, the divots and turves flew away on every side. As she swept along the dry path, the dust and clouds whirled behind her like an attendant spirit. So she passed by them, without a thought of human creatures being so near to her, for you may be sure they lay very close and still, and did not move till the last trace of her vanished behind the slopes of the Black Mountains. "Now is our chance," said Duncan the youngest to his 2 brothers. "The old bird has gone on a journey. Let us harry her nest." "Oh, but that would be stealing," said Donald. "Stealing?" said Duncan. "Stealing the stolen. How do you know we won't find some of our own goods there? At any rate, if they are not ours, they are not hers, whoever it is they belong to." So as Duncan was the clever one of the family, and never was contradicted, although the youngest, there was no more to be said about the matter, and off they started for Benabrach. It did not take them long to arrive at the summit, where the witch's home was, and where her well can be seen to this day, for they were anxious to get through the business as soon as possible before the good lady should return, and they were brave lads and had stout hearts for a stip bray, and fear gave them an extra toe to each foot, as the saying is. Up at the bothy they had found all quiet, and they judged the witch had gone for a long journey, for the door was fast locked, and no smoke was to be seen coming out of the chimney. Yet in a very short time they made an entrance by taking off the divots from the roof, and getting in that way, but they were disappointed at seeing very little of value inside. Certainly the witch, if she had any valuables, did not keep them in the house. "Now we must have a good look around outside," said Duncan, "but before we do so, just let me prepare for the accident of her sudden return. I know a trick that will checkmate the hag, even if she does. Only you do as I say, and all will be well." As usual, the other 2 agreed, for they never ventured to contradict Duncan, as I told you before, but believed in his genius implicitly. "Donald, you go up and get a good look out, up the stack to the northeast, and give an alarm if you see anybody coming. Dugald, you turn your face towards the southwest and do the same." So they went out and did as they were told. Now the hag's bothy was built over a well, and the way to it was through the floor of the bothy by the means of a trapdoor set on iron hinges. Seeing which, Duncan loosened the hinges with his dirk, till he felt sure a little added weight would send trap and all into the water below. Then he put the hag's chair on top of the trap, tying a stout cord to the leg of it, and one end of this he flung over the iron girdle standing in the corner. Next, pulling the table towards the chair, he furnished the board with a large aspet and a couple of knives, just as if a feast had been laid by her imps, against the return of their mistress. Then he collected a dozen large stones and set them up by the wall, to be handy if occasion required. Well, scarcely had he finished all of these arrangements when a cry from Dugald gave the alarm that the hag was returning full speed from the direction of the Black Mountains. And looking in that direction, the three brothers saw her, sure enough, coursing over the waste in a direct line with her home, waving her magic staff. As she strode past the pools, the water splashed upwards in brown foam before her. As she clambered over peat hags, the divots and turves flew away on every side. As she swept along the dry paths, the dust and clouds whirled behind her like an attendant spirit. "Quick," said Duncan. "Get in through the hole in the roof. Sit down, both of you, on the big ashet in the board. Garnish your heads with kale, shut your eyes, and don't move or say a word, and all will be well." So Donald and Dougal did as he told them. They crept in through the hole in the roof and got up on the table, and sitting down on the big ashet, they covered their heads with kale and shut their eyes. And Duncan hid behind the large girdle in the corner, holding the cord light in his hand. Thus they waited in silence for what was going to happen. They had not to wait long, for the witch was soon at the door, which sprang open at the touch of her staff, and disclosed the horrid hag entering with upturned and snorting nose, for she had smelt food a long way off, and could not make out whence came the scent. "Ha ha!" she muttered in delight. "By my troth, my imps have provided a fair feast for me in my absence. 'Tis capital." And she flung her magic crutch into the corner, took up the knife and fork, and sat down on the chair at the end of the table, ready to enjoy her gruesome supper. But the supper was not for her this time. Just as she was in an act of sitting down, Duncan pulled the cord with a mighty tug, and the chair flew away from under the witch, so that she came down with a mighty crash on the trapdoor, which, giving way, suddenly precipitated her backwards into the bubbling water below. "Now for it," said Duncan, and the brothers, leaping down from the table, seized the large stones Duncan had placed in the readiness along the wall, and flung them down with all their force onto the top of the old hag below. Wow, these brothers are brutal. When these were all done, they turned the table over the hole and heaped on it everything that they could lay their hands on. Nothing that they could lift and move came amiss. Then they sat themselves exhausted on top of the pile to rest and wipe their faces, for it had been a desperate hard job. "No, you don't," said Duncan, leaping down as he saw the magic staff creeping and crawling like a snake towards the door. But the crutch was too sharp for him and wriggled under the door, and gliding off was soon lost among the heather and fern that surrounded the summit of Ben Nebrach. Now, there had been no sound or disturbance from the well for some time, so they concluded that the old hag was safely settled, and for all this time, and Duncan gave it as his opinion that they might now and go and have a leisurely look around about the place to see if there was anything worth carrying off. So Donald searched about the summit to the north, Dougal to the south, and Duncan to the east. There was no use at all in going towards the west, for a precipice went straight down on that side, and it would have been a waste of time to have done so. To the north, where Donald went, was what one might call the garden, if such a collection of weeds might be given that name. There Donald went up and down, yet nothing of the slightest value to himself or anyone else did he see, and he felt disgusted at taking all this trouble for nothing. Well, he was just going to give up the search in despair when he espied a very handsome flower growing beside a rock at the further end, and though he would go and thought he would go and have a look at it before telling his brothers of his unprofitable search. And the plant was a really pretty one. It had a splendid yellow flower like a great gowan growing on the top of a stout stalk, which sprang from a bunch of large green leaves below. He certainly never had seen the like before, and he stood there admiring it very much. "I wonder what sort of plant this can be," said Donald. "Oh, I'm a thunder plant," said the flower. "A what?" said Donald. "A thunder plant," said the flower again. "Indeed, and what sort of kind can that be?" said Donald. I love how he just doesn't question the fact that there's just this talking plant. "Just smell me, and you will soon see," said the flower. Well, Donald was curious to know what sort of plant a thunder flower would be, so he leaned down and gave a truly good sniff in the very center of the petals. Bang! There was a startling report, and the echoes of it rolled and rolled round the mountains, and Donald fell flat on his back with astonishment and alarm. "Well, we live and learn something new every day, certainly," said Donald as he got up, rubbing his legs and elbows. "I'm not sure but that you would be a good companion at a pinch, if you could always do that when you were asked." I don't object to going with you as a companion, said the flower. Dig me up carefully and put me in your wallet. I may be of some use to you in some way. That thing is huge. How are you going to fit it in your bag? So Donald dug the thunder plant up carefully with his knife and put it in his wallet. At any rate, I should not go home empty. A plant is better than nothing, quoth he. And though of what use a thunder plant may be to me, I assuredly do not know at present. Time will show that, said the thunder plant. I will it, said Donald. In the meantime, Dugald, the second brother, had gone to seek for treasure on the south side of the bothy. Here at first he sought most carefully, but could discover nothing of even the smallest value, and like Donald getting tired of seeking, he was almost giving up the hunt in despair when he heard, or thought he heard, a strange weird chuckle, like laughter, proceed from behind a heap of rank grass in the shape of the wall. Examining more closely, he discovered the cause of the noise in a queer-looking grey hen seated amongst the rubbish. She had a bright red comb and a yellow beak, and from her eyes came such a strange look, unusual in an ordinary fowl, as she fixed them upon the stranger, that Dugald at once understood the bird was something decidedly out of the common. Dear me, said Dugald, what sort of fowl are you? A thunderfowl, said the bird. What? said Dugald. I believe I answered loud enough, remarked the bird. A thunderfowl. Oh, I beg your pardon, said Dugald. You did so, but my good mother has kept poultry for many a long year at home, and I have never seen the sort before, and that astonished me. Put the coop over my head and leave me in the dark for a short space, then take it off suddenly, and you will soon find out all about it, said she. Well, Dugald did not like to refuse so civil-spoken a request, especially if it was owing to his curiosity the bird suggested the proceeding. So he put the coop over her head and counted maybe 20 and then lifted the coop off again. To say that he was astonished at the terrific crow the fowl emitted is not an adequate expression. He was startled out of his wits. No thunder could produce so mighty a report, or echoes more loud among the mountains, than the sound which came up under his nose when once more the light shone upon the red hackles of the thunderfowl, and Dugald fell flat on his back with astonishment and alarm. What do you think of that? said the fowl. You don't belie your name, said Dugald, getting up and rubbing his legs and elbows. Don't do that again without giving me warning. Still, you could not be a bad companion at a pinch, if you could trumpet like that whenever you are asked. Well, take me with you as a comrade, said the fowl. It's cold enough and lonely enough living up here anyway. I can carry you in my wallet if you don't mind, said Dougal. Capital, said the fowl. Only don't cover my head or you may be startled when you least expect it. What is it with these guys and stuffing things that are way too big in these tiny little bags? I just don't know how they do it. So Dougal did they all have like bags of holding or something? So Dougal put the thunderfowl in his wallet, and her head looked out through a hole in the top, and quite pleased with his discovery, he went to seek his brothers. Now as for Duncan, the youngest brother, he went, as was arranged, to the east side of the mountain, to see what he could find in the way of a treasure. And like the others, it was not long before he got dead tired of searching. There was nothing to be seen but an enclosure of stones, in which were a few unpleasant nettles growing, and a pile of sticks set up on the end of the corner for fuel. He kicked up some of the nettles to see if anything was hidden among them, and stamped on the ground in all directions, to hear if it sounded hollow underneath. But nothing did he gain by either performance, and getting cross, for he did not care to be defeated in anything he undertook, as a last resource before giving it up as a bad job, he poked a long stake into the heap of sticks, and rattled it up and down in a very vicious manner. Certes, but he was astonished when under the... I know that's not what that is, but we won't be saying that word. Arose a pink, fresh-colored pig with beady eyes and a snout as black as ebony. You must find it a bit cold living upon this hilltop with so miserable a shelter as these sticks, said Duncan. I'm not a common-bred pig, said the brute. Would it be rude to ask what breed you are, said Duncan. Not at all, replied the pig. I'm a thunder pig at your service. What sort of breed is that, said Duncan. If you want to know, just kiss me once between the eyes. It will save a lot of explanation. Now, Duncan was not accustomed to kiss swine between the eyes, or anywhere else for the matter of that, but he thought he had better not decline, as it was his fault that the pig had been disturbed, and one never knows what may be got by being civil to anything, man or beast, and the pig looked clean as pigs go. So he kissed the pig between the eyes. The next moment Duncan felt himself flat on the ground, for such a grunt came from the porker that he fell over backwards from alarm and astonishment at the terrific explosion, and the mountain top so long resounded with the report that you would think that the echoes were never going to cease talking about it to one another. "It's lucky you don't produce lightning as well," said Duncan, getting up with a wry face and bruised elbows. "I would rather have you for a friend than a foe any day." "I am quite willing to be the first," said the pig. "For myself, I don't mind if I go with you as a companion. I am rather sick of life up here." "I, too, shall be glad of your company, and that's a bargain," said Duncan. "And now let me introduce you to my brothers, whom I see coming towards us." So the three brothers met and told their discoveries, and introduced each of the other to his new companion. Then, having nothing more to do at the summit, they descended to the glen below. Even to this day there is more thunder round Ben Nebrach than any of the mountains in the neighbourhood, and when storms are at their loudest round its crags, "Hark!" say the good wives of Rannoch, "'tis the witch of Ben Nebrach working with her thunder servants, and the mountain is avoided to this day." So towards the west these three brothers, with their new friends, travelled all that afternoon, and just as they arrived at the head of Glennevie, I wonder if it's Glennevie, the sun set. So they rested for the night under the shadow of Benenbeg, since not for all the world could they have ventured to pass through that glen after nightfall, for fear of the three green men who inhabited it, and who were reported savage and fierce to all travellers. Let me get a drink of water. Part 2. It was very early the next morning that the three brothers arose, for Dugald had put the thunderfowl under his plaid when they went to sleep, quite forgetting what would happen if he took it off suddenly in the morning sunshine. This very thing really occurred quite unexpectedly at sunrise, for the wind blowing up the valley flung a corner of his plaid aside, and a beam of light glancing on the red comb of the bird made the creature crow as only if of the feathered creatures could crow. The mountains rattled with the report, and the three brothers awoke with a jump. The folk dwelling in the neighbourhood put their heads out of their bothy windows and said to one another, "Ha! Thunder and a clear sky! Strange!" And a good many things, both man and beast, awoke that morning earlier than their usual. But our heroes knew better by this time what it was, and so they arose, slung their wallets over their backs, and with the thunder pig trotting beside Duncan, I'm glad they didn't just say that he stuck that in his bag, because, how would you fit a pig in your bag? It was already bad enough with a giant flower and the bird, but, a pig is not going to fit in there. Thunderpig trotting beside Duncan, they proceeded on their way. But not far had they travelled before the bothy of the first green man met their view rising beside the pathway. A queer building it looked, circular, flat-topped, and without windows, for trolls and such can bear but little light. Nothing, in fact, broke the plain appearance of the building but a small, low door, formed of 3 slabs of stone, one at each side and one for the lintel, that not even high enough for the evil creature to creep through without stooping. "Now," said Duncan to Donald, "you go and try your luck with the first green man, while Dugald and I wait here. When you give us a call or require assistance, we shall be at hand." Donald did not dispute the matter with Duncan, though the youngest, he was the cleverest. But I told you that before. So taking up his wallet, which contained the thunder plant, he went to the bothy of the green man and gave a good rap at the door. "There is nobody home," said the troll within. "Go away." "But it is just that nobody I want to see," said Donald, and he gave the door a kick and crept in. There he saw an ugly troll squatting by a turf fire, and that troll had green eyes and a green plaid mantle cast over his shoulders, and green hair twisted in plaits hung down behind. "That's a very vulgar trick to play in another man's house," said the troll. "What's your business?" "Oh, I am come about a situation. Perhaps you may want a servant," said Donald. No, go away," said the troll. "I have enough to do find a room for myself." "But just listen," said Donald. I am a first-rate gardener, and I could put your kale patch in order in a jiffy. It is desperate untidy, and I am sure it wants tidying badly. Oh, very well then, go and dig your fill in the garden, said the troll, with more urbanity than Donald expected. Go along and dig, go along and delve. The fact was the troll was much upset in his mind that morning, and he felt too sick to go on arguing, having heard thunder, which you know is fatal to trolls. That's convenient. And he wanted to get rid of the intruder at any price. He also considered that as soon as Donald was the other side of the door, he would be able to bolt it within, and if Donald got in again after that, well, then the troll would be much surprised indeed. I love how the troll is just like, please just get out of my house. I don't want you in here. You strange man. Honestly fair, like Donald just burst into this poor guy's house. As soon as Donald got outside the door, he looked round carefully and quickly, and when he was sure the troll was not looking, he swiftly planted the thunder plant in the center of the kale patch between the bothy and the road. No! Are they just like gonna kill the people? Like to kill the trolls? In an instant, the thunder plant raised its stalk and spread its leaves around while the blossom at the top unfurled itself like a gigantic gowan. Oh, do come out, dear master, and see the lovely flower that has grown in your kale patch, said Donald. Not if I know it, thought the troll, and he sat silent. But Donald continued to call out at the same thing. The troll thought he might just as well come have a look and see what really was going on, so he peeped through a crack in the side of the door. And astonished he was at the size and beauty of the plant. He could not make out for the life of him how the plant got there. He had not seen it before. Then he thought this must be inquired into, for trolls, of all creatures, are most curious, and know nothing, want to understand and knowing nothing, want to understand everything. So the troll forgot all about the thunderstorm and opened the door, putting his ugly head through the aperture. What's the use of that plant? Said the troll. Oh, it has the most lovely smell you ever smelt in the world for one thing, said Donald. Come out and smell it. No! They're gonna kill the troll. Gosh darn it. Smell it yourself, said the troll. I've already done so, said Donald, and I was oh so astonished, which was anything but a story on his part, you will readily admit. Bring the plant here, said the troll, for I won't come out for you or any plant. Oh then, said Donald, I shall carry it down the glen somewhere else if you don't think it worth coming out to even smell it. Now, to think anything of his was being carried off made the troll very angry. Also, he was seized with a desire to smell the plant, so he persuaded himself that there was no danger. No. In going out just this little way, throwing open the door, he crawled out, waddled up to the thunder plant, and took a good long sniff with his ugly snout. Bang! And you know what happened then. But the troll, thinking that the thunder was bursting under his very nose, as in truth it was, fled helter-skelter back to his bothy so swiftly that, forgetting to bob his head on entering the low doorway, he dashed his brains out on the lintel and fell dead on the threshold. And that was the end of him. That was brutal! What the heck? I'm always these folklore tales are always super, brutal. Then Donald cried out to his brothers, and they came running up, and these three together ransacked the bothy, finding as they expected gems and jewels, silver and gold, hidden in the four corners, besides a lump of fiery-colored crystal above price, stowed away below the hearthstone. Now, Donald, do you stay here, said Duncan. Keep what you have fairly earned, while I and Dugald go a bit further on and try our luck with the other two green men of the glen. So Donald stopped behind and waved a farewell to his two brothers as they went down the valley under the shade of Ben Nevi. And it was not long before they saw a round tower like the first, built in the middle of the glen close to the roadside. That's the bothy of the second green man, said Duncan. Go you, Dugald, and try your luck. I will wait for you here with the thunder pig till I hear you call out. So off Dugald went with the thunderfowl, looking out of his wallet. Is anyone within? Said Dugald, rapping with his stick at the little low door. No, said the harsh voice, which he knew was the troll's. Go about your business. A word with you first, said Dugald. That word will be your last then, said the troll, if you don't move on. Flatly, I won't move on, said Dugald. I must and will speak to you. In the name of all that's ugly, tell your business then, said the troll, opening the door and showing his hideous green face to Dugald. Well, said Dugald, I am a master cook, and a cook broth out of nothing, and I am on the lookout for a situation. Now the troll considered for a moment. He had not a good meal for a day or two, owing to the thundery weather, especially to the violent reports heard both yesterday and that very morning, and being unable to go out and procure food, and feeling really very hungry, the thought of broth made his chops water. Besides, said he, what need have I to be afraid of this intruder? If he fails in his cooking me the broth, it won't take long to destroy him and stew him into a broth instead. So he said aloud, broth indeed. Well, cook it and serve it, but if you fail, and it proves not savory to my taste, cook or no cook, off goes your head in a trice. And he scraped and scrubbed a long dirk on the threshold to sharpen it, and to give point to his words. Oh, you'll find it savory enough to last for a long time, said Dugald. Give me that kale pot with a cover on it, that I see lying behind the door. So the troll gave him the kale pot with a cover on, and Dugald carried it outside as if to fill it with water at the burn. But when he was below the bank out of the sight of the troll, he deftly put the thunderfowl into it instead and shut down the lid. Then he brought the pot back to the bothy, and placed it on the ground before the troll. Now take your spoon up, said Dugald. Wait till I count to 20, then lift the lid and see what sort of broth I can cook. Take my word for it, my friend, you will never want to taste any other after that. Oh, my cat's come up to visit. Go down, Midnight. You're in the way. Un, da, tre, kahir, counted Dugald, and scarcely had he gotten to the word fihed. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Fide, probably. When the impatient troll flung aside the lid and, plunging the iron spoon into the pot, stirred up the thunderfowl that was sitting quietly at the bottom. And the light from the chimney above smote suddenly on the red comb of the thunderfowl, and she gave such a crow that the walls of the bothy shook as if were stricken with a thunderbolt. Then up leaped the troll and fled shrieking with dismay towards the door, for he thought the fire had come through the roof. But so full of terror was he that he quite forgot to bob his head, and so dashing out his brains on the lintel, he lay dead and still on the threshold, and that was the end of him. Are they all just going to die the exact same way? Then Dugald called out to his brother Duncan, who was keeping watch, and as he had promised, a short way up the road, and Duncan and the Thunder Pig came to his call as quick as they could. Indeed, it was not long before they unearthed the troll's treasure, gems and jewels, silver and gold, hidden in the four corners of the bothy, and a large slab of golden topaz, worth a king's ransom, stowed away under the hearthstone. Now, said Duncan, you stop here and look after your possessions while I go to the end of the glen with the Thunder Pig. Wait for me here till I return, I hope with treasure. Then we will pick up Donald and go home together. So Dugald remained in possession of the second green man's bothy, and Duncan and the Thunder Pig went on alone down the glen towards the sea. Just as he had expected, on emerging from the glen, he saw on the right-hand side of the road a bothy exactly like the last, enclosed within a dike and of loose stones. There was no sign of life about it, and it looked so particularly forbidding that Duncan determined to have a good look round and inspect the place from every side before he knocked at the door. Getting over the dike, he crept quietly round the back of the bothy, and there, on a level with his head, he saw a window, just big enough to crawl in or out of, filled with wattles twisted up and crossed like bars. This will be of some use, I feel sure, said Duncan, and then he asked the Thunder Pig to be so good as to lie down under the window and to wait till he called. Oh, the Thunder Pig was quite agreeable to do so. Having settled that, Duncan went to the little door in front and knocked, but no sign or answer came from within. But he felt sure that the green man must be at home, for trolls never steal abroad in the daytime, but love the dark gloaming and night alone. "This troll must be either deaf or very uncivil," said Duncan, and so saying he took a short run and gave the door such a fierce kick that he sent it crashing inwards, bolts and fastenings flying into the middle of the chamber. Gotta get a drink again. Ugh. "How dare you intrude in my bothy, you good-for-nothing scamp, you," said the troll. For of course, as soon as he saw there was no further use of concealment, the ill-omened creature emerged from behind a heap of turf in the corner. "How dare you kick my furniture about in that way? Where are your manners? I tell you, if your parents ever taught you any, they taught you them upside down." "Oh," said Duncan, putting on an air of complete composure, "I heard you a bit lonely, and so I came in to call on you in a friendly sort of way in passing." "Who told you I was lonely? I'm not lonely, do you hear?" screamed the troll. "I'm not lonely, and I don't care if she never comes back again." "Oh-ho," thought Duncan. "She never comes back again? There's a she in it. I'm on the scent of something." So he said as a shot, "Oh, then she has not come back yet? That's very curious." "Hush, hush," said the troll, putting out both his hands as if to hide some horrible vision. "I see you know all about it. No, she has not come back, but I am desperately afraid she will. Look what she did this morning," said he, pointing to the broken furniture and crockery that strewed the floor. For you must know that the troll had that day had a fierce and fearful quarrel with his spouse, which ended in his turning her out into the road, and she had marched off fuming, and threatening to return in a very short time with her brother, a more powerful troll, and be avenged. "That accounts for the hubbub I heard a short while ago up in the glen," said Duncan. "I have no doubt at all she is coming back very shortly." "Oh, now don't you say that. That is too horrible. What shall I do?" "What do you advise me to do?" said the troll, for by this time he was thoroughly frightened. "You don't know what a nasty, spiteful, revengeful thing my wife is." "Well," said Duncan, laughing to himself at how the simple troll let out his secret, "I'll tell you what to do in the first place. I would put the house a bit in order and remove all signs of the quarrel. You do this drum up, and I will make that little chamber yonder tidy, for I am a good hand as a house servant. Then, don't you see, when your wife comes back to pay you out for this morning's work, you can easily say she must have dreamt it all." "Capital," said the troll, much relieved. "You shall have a nice reward if I succeed in this." But the evil thing only wanted an opportunity to give him a smack on the head as soon as he had the chance, you may rely on it. So Duncan went to the recess in the wall where the little window was, and where he saw the troll's wife's bed lying in an untidy heap on the ground, and while the old troll was busily engaged in readying up the large chamber, he whistled softly to the thunder pig outside. He came to the window, and lifting it through the wattles, he made it lie down on the bedclothes. Oh, I see where this is going. Then he fixed the troll's nightcap on the thunder pig's head, tying it up under the chin, and having pulled a plaid up as far as its neck, he sneaked it in all round so that nothing was seen but a pink face under the nightcap. He then bade the thunder pig lie still and not move till he got the word. "Oh my!" cried Duncan, coming into the middle chamber. "There's a fine thing happened. There's something strange asleep in the bed. It must surely be your wife come back unknown to you." "Good life," said the troll, sitting down with a plump on the hard floor. "You don't say so." "But I do say so," said Duncan. "Whatever am I to do?" said the troll. "Come, you won't mind putting on my clothes and pretending to be me for a bit while I hide. Yes, do. I'll make it worth your while, and she will be that terrible when she wakes. Oh, I think she'll have a fit." "Nonsense," said Duncan. "I'll tell you a much better plan. It's the very chance for you. Just you creep in quietly and wake her with a good sound kiss between her eyes. Take my word for it, you won't hear any more on the subject." "Think so?" said the troll. "I'm not so sure. She's so revengeful." "Think so?" said Duncan. "I say so. I'll stake my life on it if it don't succeed, or if you have another row with your wife after you have done so. I'll tell you what, I promise to marry her myself," and Duncan laughed to himself to think what a real honest truth he was speaking. "Done with you," said the troll, as he crept carefully on a tiptoe to the recess over there. Sure enough, he saw something pink with closed eyes snoring in his wife's bed. So without more ado or further investigation, for now he was alarmed to think his wife might wake up before he gave her the peacemaking caress, he bent over the sleeping figure and gave it a good sound kiss between the eyes. "Wake up, my lass, wake up," said the troll in a cheery voice. "Wake up? Indeed, it was wake up. Had the thunder got into his wife's inside, bang, 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 it took but 2 steps for the troll to cross the floor of his bothy in his rush for the door, and where forgetting just like the other 2 to bob his head, so great was his anxiety to leave the place, he dashed his brains out against the lintel and fell dead, crumpled up in an ugly mass on the threshold, and that was the end of him. Well, it did not take Duncan long to find out where the treasure lay, for he knew well enough now where to look for it. In the 4 corners of the bothy were hidden gems and jewels, silver and gold, while stowed away under the hearthstone. He found 3 bags of pearls, shining so clear and clean they must have come from the mussel beds of Leven, so pure were they. So he filled his wallet and his pockets with the treasure, and whistling to the Thunder Pig, he marched up to the glen to where his brother Dugald was waiting for him at the bothy of the 2nd Green Man, and finding him, they passed on together to the bothy of the 1st Green Man, where the eldest, Donald, expected them. Then with mutual congratulations and in cheerful companionship, they all went up to the glen homewards to Rannoch, and on the way Duncan could not help boasting of how cleverly he had managed the whole proceedings in this way and that way, and the 2 elder brothers did not contradict him, because though Duncan was the youngest, he was so much the cleverest, and so— oh, but I beg your pardon, I've already told you all that before. But they were glad when they saw once more the fair loch of Rannoch shining in the evening sun, and looked again upon the clachan and the bothies of their old friends at home, and heard the robins singing in the fir trees. There, too, they saw their old mother bringing in the washing she had hung out to dry on the rowan bushes, for it had been a fine summer day after the thunderstorm, and the west wind blew softly. She was surprised, you may be sure, to see them so soon returning with such queer companions and such full pouches. And they all 3 kissed her, and she kissed them, bidding them each a hearty welcome home. So they told their tale, and showing her all their treasures, and they blessed themselves that they never need leave that dear Rannoch and home again. Well, what? You won't be satisfied till you hear what happened to the thunder creatures? Oh, yes, I forgot to tell you that. The very next morning, when Duncan and his brothers went to the byre behind the bothy where they had lodged their companions for the night, what was their surprise to see a handsome young man, clad in tartan, standing by the door, and 2 fair maidens seated by him on the cheese press. "Your servants, sir," said the young man. "May I introduce myself as McSweeney of Glan Muick, and these are my 2 sisters, Flora and Fowla, both of whom you remember, I am sure." Oh, it's probably Swiney, actually, if it's a pig. Oh, Midnight, come here, baby. "Both of whom you remember, I am sure, as the Thunderplant and Thunderfowl. I, need hardly add, am the Thunder Pig at your service. We were enchanted by the witch of Ben Nebrach, from which thraldom you have released us, for which receive our thanks." Having said this, the young man bowed again, and his sisters got up and curtsied their acknowledgments. And Donald went up to Flora, and Dugald went up to Fowla, and begged them to remain and be their wives. And both Flora and Fowla said, "Thank you kindly, we will." But Duncan, hearing all this, turned round on his heel and went back to the bothy, and sitting down by his mother, hid his face in her apron, and refused to say a word to anybody. Then both Donald and Dugald laughed to themselves, because for the first time Duncan had made a mistake, and they had got sweet wives, and Duncan had got none for all his cleverness. But he looked so very unhappy about it that McSwiney came up to him and said, "Cheer up, I have a sister at home as beautiful as Flora or Fowla. I will send for her, and she will make you a good wife, and you will be as happy as the others." So it came to pass, and they were all married on the same day. McSwiney gave his sisters away, and the wedding feast was a splendid one, for had not the trolls treasure to buy provisions with. One thing I do hope, that the brides and their brother forgot their old tricks of thunder-making, nor played any such games on the wedding guests. I am certain it would have disturbed much the whole proceedings. I know for one I should have felt the trolls most uncomfortable. Whew. I may have to actually, for some reason my throat is really, really sore. I may have to actually end it there instead of going the full 2 hours, which is what I would like to do, but my throat is like hurting really, really bad. Let me just see how long this next story is. If it's short, then... it looks short. We'll do this one. The story of the white pet. So the white pet is a lamb brought up by hand, it says in the footnotes. There was a farmer before now who had a white pet, and when Christmas was drawing near, he thought that he would kill the white pet. The white pet heard that, and he thought he would run away, and that is what he did. He had not gone far when a bull met him. Said the bull to him, "All hail, white pet. Where art thou going?" "I," said the white pet, "am going to seek my fortune. They were going to kill me for Christmas, and I thought I had better run away." "It is better for me," said the bull, "to go with thee, for they were going to do the very same with me." "I am willing," said the white pet. "The larger the party, the better the fun." They went forward till they fell in with a dog. "All hail, white pet," said the dog. "All hail, thou dog. Where art thou going?" And the dog, "I am running away, for I heard they were threatening to kill me for Christmas." "They were going to do the very same to me," said the dog, "and I will go with you." "Come then," said the white pet. They went then till a cat joined them. "All hail, white pet," said the cat. "All hail, O cat." "Where art thou going?" said the cat. "I am going to seek my fortune," said the white pet, "because they were going to kill me at Christmas." "They were talking about killing me too," said the cat, "and I had better go with you." "Come on then," said the white pet. Then they went forward till a cock met them. "All hail, white pet," said the cock. "All hail to thyself." "O cock," said the white pet. "Where," said the cock, "art thou going?" "I," said the white pet, "am going away, for they were threatening my death at Christmas." "They were going to kill me at the very same time," said the cock, "and I will go with you." "Come then," said the white pet. They went forward till they fell in with a goose. "All hail, white pet," said the goose. "All hail to thyself, O goose," said the white pet. "Where art thou going?" said the goose. "I," said the white pet, "am running away, because they were going to kill me at Christmas." "They were going to do that to me too," said the goose, "and I will go with you." The party went forward till the night was drawing on them, and they saw a little light far away, and though far off, they were not long getting there. When they reached the house, they said to each other that they would look in the window to see who was in the house, and they saw thieves counting money. And the white pet said, "Let every one of us call his own call. I will call my own call, and let the bull call his own call. Let the dog call his own call, and the cat call her own call, and the cock his own call, and the goose his own call." With that they gave out one shout. Gare? When the thieves heard the shouting that was without, they thought the mischief was there, and they fled out, and they went to a wood that was near them. When the white pet and his company saw that the house was empty, they went in, and they got the money that the thieves had been counting, and they divided amongst themselves. And then they thought that they would settle to rest. Said the white pet, "Where wilt thou sleep tonight, O bull?" "I will sleep," said the bull, "behind the door where I used to be." "Where wilt thou sleep thyself, white pet?" "I will sleep," said the white pet, "in the middle of the floor where I used to be." "Where wilt thou sleep, O dog?" said the white pet. "I will sleep beside the fire where I used to be," said the dog. "Where wilt thou sleep, O cat?" "I will sleep," said the cat, "in the candle press where I like to be." "Where wilt thou sleep, O cock?" said the white pet. "I," said the cock, "will sleep on the rafters where I used to be." "Where wilt thou sleep, O goose?" "I will sleep," said the goose, "on the midden where I was accustomed to be." They were not long settled to rest when one of the thieves returned to look in to see if he could perceive if anyone at all was in the house. All things were still, and he went forward to the candle press for the candle, that he might kindle to make him a light. But when he put his hand in the box, the cat thrust her claws into his hands. But he took a candle with him, and he tried to light it. Then the dog got up, and he stuck his tail into a pot of water that was beside the fire. He shook his tail and put out the candle. Then the thief thought that the mischief was in the house, and he fled. But when he was passing the white pet, he gave him a blow. Before he got past the bull, he gave him a kick, and the cock began to grow, and when he went out, the goose began to labor him with its wings about the shanks. He went to the wood where his comrades were, as fast as was his legs. They asked him how it had gone with him. "It went," said he, but middling. When I went to the candle press, there was a man in it who thrust 10 knives into my hand. And when I went to the fireside to light the candle, there was a big black man lying there who was sprinkling water on it to put it out. And when I tried to go out, there was a big man in the middle of the floor who gave me a shove, and another man behind the door who pushed me out. And there was a little brat on the loft calling out, yeah, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that. Send him up here and I'll do it for him. And there was a shoemaker out on the midden belaboring me about the shanks with his apron. When the thieves heard that, they did not return to seek their lot of money. And the white pet and his comrades got it to themselves, and it kept them peaceably as long as they lived. Oh my goodness. Let's see how long this story is. Oh, we could do this one too. So a dew is a pigeon, by the way. The milk-white dew. There was once a man that brought in the fields, and had a wife and a son and a doctor. One day he caught a hare and took it home to his wife, and bade her make it ready for his dinner. While it was on the fire, the good wife tasted and tasted at it, till she had tasted it away. And then she didn't know what to do for her good man's dinner. So she cried in Johnny, her son, to come and get his head cammed. And then when she was... Oh my gosh. That one's a bit much. We're gonna skip that one, I think. Let's see about this one. Find another one or something that's kind of short that I can read before I go. A lot of these are like songs and stuff, and since I don't know I don't know the tunes, it would probably seem kind of weird. We have some stories of animals. We can read a few of these short stories, I think. The Fox Outwitted. One day the fox succeeded in catching a fine fat goose asleep by the side of a loch. He held her by the wing, and making a joke of her cackling, hissing, and fears, he said, "Now if you had me in your mouth as I had you, tell me what would you do?" "Why," said the goose, "that is an easy question. I would fold my hands, shut my eyes, say a grace, and then eat you." "Just what I mean to do," said Rory. Rory is a corruption of a Gallic proper name, which means one whose hair is the color of the fox. And folding, "Just what I mean to do," said Rory. And folding his hands and looking very demure, he said a pious grace with his eyes shut. But while he did this, the goose has spread her wings, and she was now halfway over the loch, so the fox was left to lick his lips for supper. "I will make a rule of this," he said in disgust, "never in all my life to say a grace again till after I feel the meat warm in my belly." The fox troubled with fleas. The fox is much troubled by fleas, and this is the way in which he gets rid of them. He hunts about till he finds a lock of wool, and then he takes it to the river and holds it in his mouth, and so puts the end of his brush into the water, and down he goes slowly. The fleas run away from the water, and at last they all run over the fox's nose onto the wool, and then the fox dips his nose under and lets the wool go off with the stream. This is told as a fact, it says in the footnotes. The Fox and the Bagpipes. The fox, being hungry one day, found a bagpipe, and proceeded to eat the bag, which is generally, or was till lately, made of hide. And when the fox bit it, the drone gave a groan, when the fox, surprised but not frightened, said, "Here is meat and music." A popular saying in the West Highlands. The Fox's Stratagem. The fox is very wise indeed. I don't know whether it is true or not, but an old fellow told me that he had seen him go to a loch where there were wild ducks, and take a bunch of heather in his mouth, and then go to the water and swim down with the wind till he got into the middle of the ducks. And then he would go the heather, and then he let go the heather and killed 2 of them. The Fox and the Wrens. A fox had noticed for some days a family of wrens, of which he wished to dine. He might have been satisfied with one, but he was determined to have the whole lot, father and 18 sons, and all so like that he could not tell one from the other, or the father from the children. It is no use to kill one son, he said to himself, because the old cock will take warning and fly away with the 17. I wish I knew which is the old gentleman. He set his wits to work to find out, and one day, seeing them all threshing in a barn, he sat down to watch them. Still, he could not be sure. Now I have it, he said. Well done, the old man's stroke. He hits true, he cried. Oh, replied the one he suspected of being the head of the family, if you had seen my grandfather's strokes, you might have said that. The sly fox pounced on the cock, ate him up in a trice, and then soon caught and disposed of the 18 sons, all flying in terror about the barn. A fox one day met a cock, and they began talking. How many tricks canst thou to do? Said the fox. Well, said the cock, I could do 3. How many canst thou do thyself? I could do 13, said the fox. What tricks canst thou do? Said the cock. Well, said the fox, my grandfather used to shut one eye and give a great shout. I can do that myself, said the cock. Do it, said the fox. And the cock shut one eye and crowed as loud as he ever could, but he shut the eye that was next to the fox, and the fox gripped him by the neck and ran away with him. But the wife, to whom the cock belonged, saw him and cried out, Let go the cock, he's mine. Say thou, I think it would be, is it Shemokolik Fain Athan, I think is what it would be. It is my own cock, said the cock to the fox. Then the fox opened his mouth to say, as the cock did, and he dropped the cock, and he sprang up on the top of the house and shut one eye and gave a loud crow, and that's all there was of that, no idea, tale. How the wolf lost his tail. One day the wolf and the fox were out together, and they stole a dish of crowdy. Now the wolf was the biggest beast of the 2, and he had a long tail like a greyhound, and great teeth. The fox was afraid of him, and did not dare to say a word when the wolf ate the most of the crowdy, and left only a little at the bottom of the dish for him, but he determined to punish him for it. So the next night when they were out together, the fox said, I smell a very nice cheese, and, pointing to the moonshine on the ice, there it is too. And how will you get it? Said the wolf. Well, stop you here till I see if the farmer is asleep, and if you keep your tail on it, nobody will see you or know what it is there, that it is there. Keep it steady. I may be sometime coming back. So the wolf lay down and laid his tail on the moonshine and the ice, and kept it for an hour till it was fast. Then the fox, who had been watching him, ran into the farmer and said, The wolf is there. He will eat up the children, the wolf, the wolf. Then the farmer and his wife came out with sticks to kill the wolf, but the wolf ran off, leaving his tail behind him, and that's why the wolf is stumpy-tailed to this day, though the fox has a long brush. The story errs in ascribing a stumpy tail to the wolf. Frog and Crow. Here is a bit of crow language, a conversation with a frog. When it is repeated in Gaelic, it can be made absurdly like the notes of the creatures. Yeah, there is no way I can say that. There's absolutely no way I know enough of how to say that. Yeah, no. I don't know enough Gaelic to pronounce that properly. The grouse cock and his wife. The grouse cock and his wife are always disputing, and may be heard on any fine evening, or early morning quarreling and scolding about the stock of food. This is what the hen says. Again, I don't know how to pronounce any of that. See thou yonder day, and yon other day. See thou yonder hill, and yon other hill. The Eagle and the Wren. The eagle and the wren once tried who could fly highest, and the victor was to be the king of the birds. So the wren flew straight up, and the eagle flew in great circles. And when the wren was tired, he settled on the eagle's back. When the eagle was tired, he stopped, and "Where art thou, wren?" said the eagle. "I am here above thee," said wren. And so the wren won the match. The wren's presumption. "Thou art lessened by that," said the wren, when he dipped his beak in the sea. The two foxes. A man was one day walking along the road with an creel of herrings on his back, and two foxes saw him. And the one who was the biggest said to the other, "Stop thou here and follow the man, and I will run round and pretend that I am dead." So he ran round and stretched himself on the road. The man came on, and when he saw the fox, he was well pleased to find so fine a beast, and picked him up and threw him into the creel, and he walked on. But the fox threw the herrings out of the creel, and the other followed and picked them up, and when the creel was empty, the big fox leapt out and run away, and that is how he got the herrings. Well, they went on together till they came to the smith's house, and there was a horse tied at the door, and he had a golden shoe, and there was a name on it. "I will go and read what is written on that shoe," said the big fox, and he went, but the horse lifted his foot and struck a kick on him and drove his brains out. "Lad, lad," said the little fox, "no scholar me, nor wish I to be," and of course he got the herrings. The Bee and the Mouse. A bee met a mouse and said, "Come over till we make a house." "I will not," said, I think it's Luca, the mouse. "He to whom those gavest thy summer honey, let him make a winter house for thee. I have a little house under the ground that can reach neither cold nor breeze. Thou wilt be a ragged creature running on the tops of the trees." The two mice. There was a mouse in the hill and a mouse in a farm. "It were well," said the hill mouse, "to be in the farm where one might get things." And said the farm mouse, "Better is peace." Alexander Jones. "Jean, sit a wee bit east," requested the town clerk between the puffs of his pipe as he sat on the corner of the bench before his fire one chilly evening. "You're taking o'er muckle room, and mair thine your share o'er the settle." But Jean, his wife, had just got her knitting into a nasty tangle, and was not in the best of humours, so declined to move one inch, or attend to what her husband was saying. "Jean," said her husband again, "sit a wee bit east. It's no decent to sit sae selfish. Sit a bit east. Do you hear?" And the town clerk gave his wife a rude shove to her end of the bench. Wow, what a jerk. "What do you mean by that? And what do you mean by east?" cried his wife. "There's no such thing as east to begin with." And "No such thing as east," shouted the town clerk. "Will you no believe the sun himself?" And then in a loud voice he declaimed that as the sun went round the earth every day, and was always rising every moment somewhere in the east, which things he hoped no one was fool enough to deny. Everywhere was the east, all over the place, and if there was anything ridiculous, it was to talk about west. If everywhere was east, there was nowhere where west could be. So he hoped his wife would not make a goose of herself and talk nonsense. But then his wife got up and said he did not look at it in the right way at all. On the contrary, the sun was all the day setting somewhere in the west, which thing she hoped no one was fool enough to contradict. And as he was always setting somewhere and doing it every moment, everywhere was west, and if everywhere was west, there was no room for east to be anywhere. So she trusted her husband would not make an ass of himself and mention east again. But he shook his head, and just like a dog that has been bitten behind the ear, was going to reply when she kilted her petticoats and ran around the room in one direction to show how it was done, crying, "West, west, west." This made the town clerk very angry. And he got up also and hitched his trousers and ran around the table in the opposite direction, yelling out "East, east, east," to show how he thought it was done. Yet it only ended by their getting very giddy and banging their heads together, a thing which hurt very much, and did not conduce to good temper or the solving of the difficulty, you may be sure. But Alexander Jones sat quiet in the corner and said nothing. Still, they agreed in one thing, namely, that the question was of too deep importance to rest there. So they went to the grocer, who had a good-sized house up the street, and told him all about the thing with the ins and outs of the question. And the grocer and the grocer's wife, and the grocer's maiden aunt by marriage on the mother's side, and the grocer's wife's youngest married sister, and the grocer's wife's youngest married sister's little girl were all naturally much interested, to say the least. But one took one view and another took another, and they ran around the table, some this way and some that, to explain how in their opinion it was done. It only ended in their getting very giddy and banging their heads together, a thing which hurt, and did not conduce to a good temper or the solving of the difficulty, you may be sure. But Alexander Jones sat quiet in the corner all the time and said nothing. Still, they agreed in one thing, that the question was of too deep importance to rest there. So the whole lot went to the innkeeper, who had a much larger house than the grocer, down the street, and told him all about the thing with the ins and outs of the matter, and the innkeeper and the innkeeper's wife, and the innkeeper's maiden aunt by marriage on the mother's side, and the innkeeper's wife's youngest married sister, and the innkeeper's youngest married sister's little girl, were all naturally much interested, to say the least. But one took one view and another took another, and they ran around the table, some this way and some that, to explain how in their opinion it was done. And it only ended by their all getting very giddy and banging their heads together, a thing which hurt and did not conduce to a good temper or the solving of the difficulty, you may be sure. But Alexander Jones sat all the time quiet in the corner and said nothing. Still, they agreed in one thing, that the question was of too deep importance to rest there. So the whole lot went to the chief magistrate, who had the very largest house in the borough, in the middle of the street by the marketplace, and they told him all about the thing, and the ins and outs of the matter, and the magistrate's wife, and the magistrate's maiden aunt by marriage on the mother's side, and the magistrate's wife's youngest married sister, and the magistrate's wife's youngest married sister's little girl, were all naturally much interested in the matter, to say the least. But one took one view, and another took another, and they ran around the magistrate's table, some this way and some that, to explain how in their opinion it was done. And it only ended by their all getting very giddy and banging their heads together, a thing which hurt, and did not conduce to a good temper or the solving of the difficulty, you may be sure. But Alexander Jones sat quiet in the corner and said nothing. Still, they agreed in one thing, that the question was of too deep importance to rest there. So the magistrate called a meeting of the whole populace to the town hall. And when the populace came to the town hall, the chief magistrate told them all about it, and the ins and outs of the matter, and the populace's wife, the populace's maiden aunt by marriage on the mother's side, and the populace's wife's youngest married sister, and the populace's wife's youngest married sister's little girl were all naturally much interested, to say the least. But one took one view and another took another. And they all wanted then to run around a table to express how each thought it was done. But there a difficulty arose, for alas, there was no table in the town hall to run around, and what then were they to do? Yet they were not going to be balked for a trifle like that, not they, so they requested the chief magistrate to stand in the middle, and let them all run round him in the direction it pleased them. But the chief magistrate objected strongly, for he said it would make him the worse than giddy to see some folk going one way around him, and some going the other. Indeed, it would be certain to make him sick, so he suggested instead that Alexander Jones should be placed in the middle. Yes, why could they not run around him? Better make use of him. He was so stupid and said nothing. Besides, the chief magistrate wanted to run round with the rest of them, with the best of them himself, and why should he be cut out more than anyone else? No, no, cried they all. Alexander Jones is too small, and would be certain to be trod upon. It would not do at all, and the chief magistrate must really do what he was asked. Hadn't they, only the other day, given him an imitation gold badge to wear on his stump? Well, never mind, and he must do something for them in return, or they'd take it away, so they would. So the poor man had to give in, but he insisted upon having his eyes bandaged, and also having a good chair to sit in, otherwise he knew he would be sick. Of that he felt certain. Then they bandaged his eyes with an old dishclout that they got, it's probably dishcloth, they got from somewhere, for the handkerchief would not go around his face, he had such a very big nose. and having seated him in a chair, they all ran round him in a circle, some this way, some another, but they only got very giddy and banged each other's heads, a thing which hurt, and did not conduce to a good temper or the solving of the difficulty. And worse than all, just at the end, when they could run along no longer, they were quite out of breath. Eliza Darmid, the fat widow who kept the confectionery shop, fell plump against the chief magistrate and sent him and his chair flying all along the floor. But Alexander Jones sat quiet in the corner and said nothing. When the chief magistrate pulled the bandage off his eyes in a towering passion and said something must and should be settled there and then, no, he would stand it no longer. He threatened also, if they did not agree, he would put a tax on buttons. Which was rather clever of him, for you see both sexes would feel that tax equally, and he, inasmuch as his robes were all fastened by a buckle at his neck and a jeweled girdle around his stomach, well, never mind, it would not affect him at all. And as the town clerk rose and said they must, in that case, devise some other terrible way of discovering the answers to this terrible riddle, and he proposed to call in from the street Peter the roadman, for he was up and about at all hours, late and early, and would know more than most about the sun's movements. Only if they asked him, they must also ask his one-eyed sister Jessica. She, you must know, took in the chief magistrate's washing, and so was a person of more importance in the borough. For Peter would certainly decline to come unless she came with him. Now this was indeed most provoking for me, because you see there was not another square inch of the room left in the town hall for another person, and two people would have to go out to let Peter the roadman and his sister Jessica come in. So they turned me out for one, as being a stranger from the country, only asked there in courtesy, and Alexander Jones for the other, because he was so stupid and said nothing. Thus, you see, I never knew what decision the meeting came to, though I am certain it did come to some, as next morning people's clothes were still worn as usual, and buttons were at the same price in the shops as before. And though disappointed greatly for my own sake, I am still more for years, my friends, who I must say have listened to this long story most patiently. But why was Alexander Jones so stupid as to sit still in the corner and say nothing? Oh, hush, hush now. How silly you are. Why, how on earth could he do anything else? Alexander Jones was the town clerk's tomcat. I think these are probably going to be a bit longer. We can do one more, because it's almost 2 hours. My throat is almost dead, though. Fairy tales, the fairies of Scotland. The fairies of Scotland are represented as a diminutive race of beings of a mixed or rather dubious nature, capricious in their dispositions, and the mischievous in their resentment. They inhabit the interior of green hills, chiefly those of conical form, in Gaelic termed Cian, on which they lead their dances by moonlight, impressing upon the surface of marks of circles, which sometimes appear yellow and blasted, sometimes of a deep green hue, and within which is dangerous to sleep or be found after sunset. The removal of those large portions of turf, which thunderbolts sometimes scoop out of the ground with singular regularity, is also ascribed to their agency. Cattle, which are suddenly seized with the cramp or some similar disorder, are said to be elf-shot, and the approved cure is to chafe the parts affected with bluebonnet, which it may readily be believed often restores the circulation. The triangular flints, frequently found in Scotland, with which the ancient inhabitants probably barbed their shafts, are supposed to be weapons of fairy resentment, and are termed elf arrowheads. The rude brazen battle axes of the ancients, commonly called Celts, I'm just going to say Celts. I know some people pronounce it differently, but, are also ascribed to their manufacture. But like the Gothic Duergar, their skill is not confined to the fabrication of arms. Interesting. So, if... Midnight, please. Well, what... Why would you... You silly bean. My cat just pulled my alarm clock down on top of her head. Goofball. You silly cat. Anyway. If you're familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, Duergar are the essentially like the deep like dwarves, like the drow, kind of like the drow counterpart of dwarves. So it's interesting to see them mentioned there. But like the Gothic Duergar, their skill is not, like, obviously it's not the same thing because, you know, D&D, like, just takes inspiration from existing folklore. But it's interesting to see that word. Their skill is not confined to the fabrication of arms, for they are heard sedulously hammering in lins, precipices, and rocky or cavernous situations, where, like the dwarves of the mines, mentioned by George Agricola, they busy themselves in imitating the actions and the various employments of men. The Brook of Beaumont, for example, which passes in its course by numerous lins and caverns, is notorious for being haunted by the fairies and the perforated and rounded stones which are formed by trituration in its channel, are termed by the vulgar fairy cups and dishes. It is sometimes accounted unlucky to pass such places without performing some ceremony to avert the displeasure of the elves. There is, upon the top of Minmuir, a mountain in Peebleshire, a spring called the Cheese Well, because anciently those who passed that way were wont to throw into it a piece of cheese as an offering to the fairies, to whom it was consecrated. I wish we had a cheese well. That sounds amazing. Although it probably stinks after a while. The usual dress of the fairies is green, though on the moors they have been sometimes observed in heath brown, or in weeds dyed with the stone raw, or lichen. They often ride in invisible procession, when their presence is discovered by the shrill ringing of their bridles. On these occasions, they sometimes borrow mortal steeds, and then such are found at morning, panting and fatigued in their stalls, with their manes and tails disheveled and entangled. The grooms, I presume, often find this a convenient excuse for their situation, as the common belief of the elves quaffing the choicest liquors in the cellars of the rich might occasionally cloak delinquencies of an unfaithful butler. Excuse me. Okay. I think that's probably going to be all for tonight. We read quite a lot. We are 110 pages into this 360-page book. And we've been going for 2 hours. My throat is very, very sore. So I think I'm probably going to go ahead and end it there. But thank you for joining me for this first iteration of this, which will hopefully be a weekly thing, Fireside Folklore. I really enjoyed it. And I hope you did too. And we'll probably, I don't know if we'll continue this next week. We might, or we might pick another one to read. I'm not sure. I'll have to read through this and see if there's anything else that's kind of interesting in here. But yeah, thanks for joining me. Next stream will be our Sunday night Crown of Leaves stream, where we'll be continuing the Crown of Leaves chapter 2. That's all for me from now. Have a good rest of your evening. Bye.